Hello and welcome to Neurologic, a podcast about autism, autistic self-advocacy, and much, much more. I'm your host, Leo Jones, and greetings and welcome to our first initial pilot episode of this podcast. So, what is Neurologic anyway? Well, this podcast will be covering, as we said before, autism, autistic self-advocacy, with a focus on quality of life but not complete normalcy, disability civil rights, intersectionality, all kinds of assistive technology, and much, much more. Be sure it will all have to do with autism and not from a perspective of trying to cure autism. A little bit about me as your host. Again, my name is Leo Jones. I am autistic. I was diagnosed before the age of 20, originally with Asperger's, but due to the recent DSM-5 reclassification, I have, of course, autism spectrum disorder. I am an autistic adult, but I am also an autistic professional. However, that does not mean I am a professional autistic. And there is a very clear difference in those two meanings. I've worked with the Autism Society, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, and other local autism organizations. To put it simply, I have a lot of experience from a variety of perspectives. So this show will be about, of course, autistic advocacy from the perspective of someone who is autistic. What the show will not cover, we're not going to talk about curing, fixing, or solving autism or autistic individuals. We're not going to be proposing any kind of anti-vaccination efforts. We're not going to discuss how autism is some sort of mystery or puzzle. That's very, very demeaning, and it continues to perpetuate many stereotypes surrounding autism. We are here to quell and quash those stereotypes, not to establish them as a mainstream part of society. We will also not be comparing autism to any kind of deadly diseases, so no comparison to diabetes or cancer or any other kind of horrible diseases. Autism is not a disease. It is a very, very diverse neurological state, and it does not kill anyone. So just to continue a little bit about the show itself, this show will be approximately 1 hour. Might be longer for deeper topics or guests. We will be having guests on the show, and not all of them will have autism. Some will have other disabilities, and some will not have any disability at all. We will start out, of course, as we are here hosting on SoundCloud. We will hopefully make our move to iTunes and hopefully be seen in more places and heard in more places, of course. We'll be posting about every week to 2 weeks, depending on various issues that are surrounding the autism community, depending on what we want to talk about. And there are a variety of issues and topics to discuss. There will be no live calling or live show. I'm sorry to say that, but we want to basically keep it at an hour, and having people call in would probably do something to increase the time exponentially, and so we're just going to not have that unless otherwise specified. So sorry about that, but no live calling in at this time. So why is this podcast being created? Neurologic is being created because, well, to be quite frankly, it's easier to reach people through podcasts. They're very popular right now, easy to download. You can listen to them at home, in your car, while you're at work, even just maybe sitting at a doctor's office. You can listen to it through your phone. It makes it very easy to discuss these issues and get this out to people that may not otherwise hear it. Of course, this goes beyond geographical restrictions as well. I enjoy radio, and I've wanted to do this actually for quite a while. It's nice to be able to get complete thoughts out without being interrupted or dismissed or ignored, which happens quite a bit, even if you are a verbal autistic individual. So also, video is much more difficult, and this way I can just start the microphone, sit down, and I can discuss these issues with you. So that's kind of the focus. I'm not looking to make any money with this. I'm not looking to have this become my new career. I just want to get out there and say these things and make sure people are aware that autistic individuals do exist. We have existed for centuries, not just decades. And we do have a lot to say, but we don't want to be ignored, and we really do want to be listened to. In my own limited research that I've seen, there are very few podcasts, especially about autism, that are produced, edited, and run by autistics. So I'm also wanting to fill a gap here. You'll find many broadcasts about autism from doctors and researchers, other neurotypical individuals, but you don't hear many autistic voices, and that needs to change. So here I am. That's what I'm going to do. So let's talk about autism. We're going to start this show off and go through the basics. So what exactly is autism? Some of you may not be quite sure. Some of you may have connotations and remembrances of Rain Man, played by Dustin Hoffman. And that is a very, very narrow stereotype. Most people, even today, see someone who's autistic as being straight, white, male, most likely a child. The autistic adult is seen as, of course, straight, white, male, and most likely nonverbal or repeats very few words and phrases, but has a savant-like IQ, meaning that they can do extreme mathematical computations, they can do wondrous feats of mental gymnastics, but they just cannot interact socially or be able to live on their own. And while this may slightly be true in some cases, any kind of savant syndrome in regards to autism is extremely rare. It's so rare, in fact, that this is why you see a lot of media surrounding this, why you have a popular culture viewpoint of seeing autistics as these amazing, giants of IQ and intelligence doing all sorts of wonderful things. You've seen it recently in shows such as The Good Doctor. You've seen it in movies like The Accountant. Yet this is a very, very skewed perspective of autism. Autism covers all races, all cultures, all genders. It's not just a boys syndrome. It also covers all ages. You have people now who are older and being diagnosed in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, even 50s and 60s. So when it comes to an actual diagnosis, we are behind as a nation and as a world. People are getting diagnosed later in life because they were skipped when they were kids. If you are able to talk, if you are able to interact, if you can pay your bills, if you can get dressed, gather your keys, get in your car and drive to work or take a bus to work and work a full-time job with an actual living wage, or at least a standard wage, then you were considered to be pretty much fine. That there wasn't anything too wrong with you that needed extra attention or a diagnosis of some sort. So for a lot of people, the autism diagnosis eluded them and they were not counted. So what we're seeing today is a huge change in that. A lot of people argue, well, maybe there's something in our environment. Maybe there's something to do with various genetics, or maybe it's the things that we're eating or putting in our food or putting in our water, or it could even be cell phones. And while there may be a tiny, tiny, tiny grain of truth to that, the most likely explanation, the one that makes the most sense and is backed up by research, is that our diagnosis tools have improved over the past 20 years. Our expansion of autism as a diagnosis has also improved. And because of that, a lot more people are getting diagnosed. Back during when Rain Man was on in the movie theaters, when Dustin Hoffman was playing that character, you didn't have anyone who is diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. At least that was not picked up by modern popular culture. Now you do. Now you have a lot of people who are diagnosed with what was termed Asperger's syndrome, but now is under the autism spectrum diagnosis umbrella. So with that, your numbers are going to go up. It makes logical sense. So please do not get alarmed if you hear, well, we have only 1 in 86 children are diagnosed with autism. Yes. And the thing is, those numbers are also tweaked by the fact that you have adults being diagnosed. And the thing is, you don't hear much from them because there are issues related to disclosure for their job, for their community, for their friends, for even their family. Disclosure is a very, very, very sensitive issue, and it's one we will be discussing on this podcast. So let's talk a little bit more about what autism is, rather than going through some of the stereotypes. So I'm going to read off here a basic definition from the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, one of the only autism-run organizations, one of the only organizations run by autistic individuals and those on the spectrum. So, what is autism? Autism is a neurological variation that occurs in about 1% of the population and is classified as a developmental disability. Although it may be more common than previously thought, it is not a new condition and exists in all parts of the world, in both children and adults of all ages. The terms autistic and autism spectrum are often used to refer inclusively to people who have an official diagnosis on the autism spectrum or who self-identify with the autism community. While all autistics are as unique as any other human beings, they share some characteristics typical of autism in common. So what are those characteristics? When we talk about autism, what exactly are we really referring to here? Because we can explain that it's a developmental disability, but that doesn't really narrow it down into simpler language that makes it easier to understand. So here are some of the characteristics. Different sensory experiences. For example, possibly heightened sensitivity to light, difficulty interpreting internal physical sensations, hearing loud sounds as soft sounds as loud, or even synesthesia, being sensitive to various types of touch externally. Some autistic people don't like to be hugged. They don't like giving handshakes. Even sensitivity to eye contact. Eye contact is one of the biggest things talked about with autism, and for a lot of people, they don't understand that it's not because we don't want to make eye contact. It is because, as a sensory stimulation problem, eye contact actually hurts. There is a pain sensation associated with it, which seems very odd for a lot of people. They don't understand how that actually happens. If you look someone in the eye, you're not connecting with them through touch, so how can this be painful? Well, to kind of explain it more simply, when you stare into the sun, that sometimes can be painful. When you look at a very bright light, that can be painful. That's kind of the sensation we're talking about, but it's a little different. So for a lot of autistics, they will have various, sensory experiences that may differ from you and others. That doesn't make it any less valid, but you have to be able to listen to them and understand this and take what they're saying as valid, because otherwise you're dismissing what is going on with their bodies and what they are feeling in real time. Another characteristic is non-standard ways of learning and approaching problem solving. For example, learning difficult tasks before simple tasks. The website for this definition, ASAN, or Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, brings a comparison of calculus versus addition. So learning calculus before learning addition. Difficulty with executive functions. Executive functions is a fancy term meaning taking care of yourself. Eating, drinking, putting on clothes, showering, washing your hands, brushing your teeth, maybe even other simpler functions such as blowing your nose, or just basically those kind of basic executive functions. When they say executive functions, that's kind of what they're pointing out. So, also being simultaneously gifted at tasks requiring fluid intelligence and intellectually disabled at tasks requiring verbal skills. So being able to adapt quickly to abstract situations or abstract topics or problems may be easier for some autistic individuals, but in situations requiring verbal skills such as social situations, understanding nuance or subtlety, or even tact may not be able to be processed the same way, or maybe much, much harder to be learned. So the dichotomy here is, for a lot of people, they associate learning calculus or being able to handle a large smattering of code relating to a very complex program that runs an entire warehouse of machines. They associate those. If you can learn those, well, then surely you have the other things already down. You already know how to take care of yourself. Your executive functioning is fine. You can talk to people. And that's just not the case. That doesn't mean that the person is somehow broken or is somehow disturbed in some way. It just means that they learn very differently. And so they have to learn in a very different fashion in regards to how they approach things. They can't learn the same way, or if they try to learn the same way as neurotypicals do, they will encounter many, many problems. They won't be able to absorb the information as others do. They won't be able to assimilate that information and process it the same way. That doesn't mean that we should basically try to force that or teach them how to learn like we do. Rather, we should allow them to learn and adapt in the ways that work best for them, because they will be able to learn that way, but we have to adapt with them, because otherwise we are trying to force a square peg into a round hole, and that kind of action just frustrates autistics and makes them feel as though they can't learn anything, which is not the case. It also frustrates neurotypicals because they see themselves learning these things this direction and assume everyone else will learn it that direction as well. So when they see someone who does not, that creates a problem. Moving on to another characteristic, deeply focused thinking and passionate interests in specific subjects. We hear about this one a lot. I hate to bring it up, but in Big Bang Theory, this is brought up a lot with Sheldon, who, let me remind everyone, was not labeled as autistic on the show at any point. So the association is one purely made on supposition and assumption. Anyway, back to this characteristic. Narrow but deep, these special interests could be anything from mathematics to ballet, doorknobs to physics, and from politics to shiny bits of metal. This is something that also gets made fun of a lot. It gets scrutinized, it gets exploited. It is something that is stereotyped and associated with autism, that you focus on one thing and really learn all about it, and that's somehow weird or strange. Yet when you have neurotypicals do this in certain areas, it's seen as proactive, or they're driven into something. If they focus on business, and they're focused on making money in a certain finite area, then all of a sudden that's okay. But once that person is labeled as autistic, then all of a sudden that becomes a problem. That these are their interests, but they're too locked into them. Well, that's another topic we're going to be discussing, but that's also an issue, is that we can't just label their interests as, well, this is too much. You're obsessed. You're obsessed with this, and you need to stop being obsessed with it, because nobody's obsessed with any one thing like you are. And that's not true at all. I mean, if the past 10 years alone of various Comic-Cons being attended in record numbers proves anything, that there are neurotypicals who are just as obsessed in very narrow but deep interests as autistics are. The only difference is, with autistics, is many of them can have better recall of information and may know things that others would dismiss. For example, knowing the entire production cast of a science fiction show of some sort. Knowing who the key grip is, or the all the stunt persons involved, that sort of thing. So it's not really that different, but it is handled in a very scrutinized fashion. Moving on to the next characteristic, atypical, sometimes repetitive movement. I hate to use the word atypical because it has been, in my opinion, bogarted by the recent Netflix show, which is terrible. And despite my apprehension, we are going to cover atypical. There is a great series of articles in nosmag.com No, it's nosmag.org, excuse me. I always get those two confused. nosmag.org. And they cover the show episode by episode. And I encourage all of you to check that out. They have a great series of articles on this, and they cover the show. And I really, really want you to check that out. That would be great to check out. So, anyway, back to talking about movement. It includes stereotyped and self-stimulatory behavior such as rocking or flapping, and also the difficulties of motor skills and motor planning associated with apraxia or dyspraxia. We see this a lot in some portrayals of autism where, well, they must flap their hands or they must do this or that. And for some autistics, they have very, very, I would say, pronounced movements. And this is for their own benefit. It's not designed to freak anybody out or scare anyone, but it's designed to help them maintain control. And in some cases, this is something that they cannot not do, because if they don't do it, then their own mental state will break down even worse. For a lot of people, some of the things they do normally, such as they may rub their hands together, or maybe even pick at their nails, or even twiddle their thumbs, for example. These are all movements that people will do to occupy themselves while waiting for something, if they're nervous or something else. Yet when autistics do it with more pronounced movements, then that is seen as an issue or a problem, or it's out of the norm, for example. So this is typical and associated with autism, but it's not a problem that needs to be erased. If there are things that can be done to assist that person, that autistic, to minimize these because they want to minimize those behaviors, that's fine. But we shouldn't be basically blaming the person for these movements and behaviors because they're weird. It's part of their autism, it's part of who they are, and that should be taken as just another characteristic of that person rather than something that needs to be extinguished. So moving on to another characteristic, need for consistency, routine, and order. See this again a lot made fun of in Big Bang Theory. For example, holidays may be experienced more with anxiety than pleasure, as they mean time off from school and the disruption of the usual order of things. People on the autism spectrum may take great pleasure in organizing and arranging items. This does not mean getting your autistic friend to come over and organize your house, because they're not going to come over and go, oh, this is great. I really love doing this. I just love organizing things. No, that's not the case at all. Don't decide that your autistic friend is going to help you get everything organized and put in order for you. That's pretty demeaning, and it's along the same lines of judging someone who is African American or black and saying, hey, you like basketball, let's go play. You can teach me how to make a three-point shot. It's the same kind of discrimination, just done in a different category. Instead of being on race, it's based on disability. So please do not do that. Please do not decide that somehow, oh, well, you're a good organization, you're autistic, right? So you can do this. That's not always the case. Not every autistic is always organized and always has everything in order, but a lot of them enjoy order and are able to find peace with that. I myself identify with having more anxiety than pleasure when it comes to some holidays. I don't really enjoy fully every single holiday because there's also the matter of dealing with social interaction. And for me, while I do enjoy talking with people and being around people and having a good time with them, being able to exchange information and all of the wonderful things that come with being around other people, there's also quite a bit of anxiety about that. What do you say? What do you do? How do you operate? What happens if you start feeling very, very exhausted right in the middle of a party and you're not even an hour into the party? What do you do in those situations? So for a lot of people, social interaction can be extremely draining, can be extremely exhausting, and that needs to be respected. just because a holiday is coming up and there's time off doesn't mean that an autistic person is going to take great joy in that. Many of them who enjoy their work, if they like what they're doing on a daily basis, they want to keep that up. It's a routine. They can rely on the routine. They don't have to worry, well, what's going to happen tomorrow? Is somebody going to come in and move my office 2 doors down? Or am I going to have to decide, am I going to have to actually write all my reports in a different pen color because someone has decided we're going to do it in this pen color? This is very limited in what I'm saying here, but when it comes to organization and routine, these things are relied upon because, honestly, when it comes to social interaction, people cannot be relied upon because they will either say things they shouldn't say or will do things that are inappropriate, or will react in a very unexpected manner. And no one, even neurotypicals, can fully predict what people will do in social situations. The only difference is, for autistics, being able to manage that is much, much more difficult. Being able to manage social situations is much, much more difficult. But managing your routine, where you know what you're going to do when you get up and you go to work and you come home, and what you do at home and what you do over the weekends, what hobbies you're interested in, that's easier to manage because you can control those variables. So when an autistic person doesn't react the same way about holidays as you do, don't take that as a sign that they hate the holiday. Don't take it as a sign that they disagree with you or they have a problem with your excitement for the upcoming holiday. Realize that for them, they don't share the same experience you do. And that's okay. That's fine. That doesn't mean that's not a huge problem. They may like a holiday that's different for them, or they may celebrate the holiday differently than you do. That works better for who they are and for how they function. So moving on to another characteristic, difficulties in understanding and expressing language as used in typical communication, both verbal and nonverbal. I've kind of alluded to this the whole time, but we're going to really hit it right here on this definition. This may manifest similarly to semantic pragmatic language disorder. It's often because a young child does not seem to be developing language that a parent first seeks to have a child evaluated. As adults, people with the autism spectrum diagnosis often continue to struggle to use language to explain their emotions and their internal state, and to articulate concepts, which is not to say they do not experience and understand these. The difference being, it's hard to put into words what they're feeling. Of course, we always hear the stereotype again, if we're going to look at all kinds of media, that autistics don't feel the same way. We feel a gamut of emotions just like you do, but we may have trouble expressing them physically, verbally, even in other ways. So we may not articulate the same body language or words, but we do still feel the same emotions. So understand and realize that just because you can, jump up and down and yay, this is wonderful, they may not have that same reaction. Just because they're not smiling doesn't mean they're not happy. And just because they may be smiling in a certain situation does not mean that they are happy with that situation. So realize that when it comes to typical communication and expression of themselves, as autistics, we have a lot of difficulty with this. So when we're trying to get something across, don't try to finish our sentences unless we ask for it or say, I need help expressing this. Don't assume what we're going to say. Try not, as hard as you can, try not to interrupt us as we're getting this out, because it may take us a little bit longer to express, but we can still express it in some cases. So in that regard, it may take us longer to express it, or we may not be able to express it fully at all. And it runs from a wide range there of various autistic individuals. And finally, difficulties in understanding and expressing typical social interaction. For example, preferring parallel interaction, having delayed responses to social stimulus, or behaving in a quote-unquote inappropriate manner to the norms of a given social context. For example, not saying hi immediately after another person says hi. The typical social nuances that we all trade on a daily basis are part of an affirmation that everything is normal, everything is going well. But none of us walk into a place at work and go, hello, is everything operating normally? Yes, everything is operating efficiently and normally. Yeah, I appreciate you telling me this, and I'm going to go sit at my desk and do my work. We don't say that sort of thing because we consider it absurd to interact in that fashion. However, the other forms that we see here may not easily be picked up, such as, good morning, how are you? May be taken as you are legitimately asking how I am. And that isn't the case. Because if you sit there and talk about how you really are, saying, well, I have this and this and this that I'm doing, and this is going on and on about how you are feeling, because that is a very broad question if we really get down to it, that will be taken as somehow odd and weird and different and totally not what we were expecting when we asked, how are you? So that, along with, of course, even basic conversations that really don't mean much, such as talking about the weather. Maybe even talking about sports. Now, myself, I enjoy going to some sporting events. I am even a fan of a local sports team. So I'm a little bit different there when it comes to my own autistic behaviors and traits. But for a lot of autistic individuals, sports is rather meaningless. Yes, you can kick a ball around, you can pass a ball around, you can do these things, but really you're just basically playing. And from one year to the next, things change, but it really kind of stays the same. This is not a way for autistic adults to say, well, sports are meaningless and you shouldn't follow them. It's, I don't get what the meaning of it is. For a lot of us, we love sports. We may enjoy it, watching it, going to games, etc. But it all is very, very, very social. I mean, you get together with your friends and family to watch a game. You get together with your friends and family at stadiums, giant stadiums full of lots of people to experience a game, to watch this, to watch a very finite number of people on a field who are paid large sums of money to play a sport. And we cheer and sing and get together and chant, and we look at each other and smile, and there's high fives exchanged. We buy each other alcoholic beverages to help stimulate and smooth social interaction. Sometimes maybe too much. But all of this is like I said, I've said before, is very nuanced, very subtle. It's not easily picked up upon if it's not inherent. And so when you are interacting with this and you see an autistic person involved, but they're not interacting the same way you are, it's because all these things are not easily pronounced. I mean, when someone talks about the weather at work, it's, well, yes, this is the weather. Oh, I don't know if I can handle snow. I mean, how do you respond to that whenever it is, January 23rd and snow comes around in your area every winter? I mean, snow should be coming at any point if it's not there already. And it's like, and you're thinking to yourself, well, how do I respond to that? Well, sorry, snow's coming. I'm sorry I don't like the snow. I really am. It's just here. How do you respond to that? What the typical response people want out of that is either, hey, now I like the snow, and then you have a friendly, fake little argument about the snow or whatever, or about the seasons, and they say, well, I like summer, and you can say, oh, I can't stand summer, I have to put on sunscreen and mosquitoes, etc., etc. Or you agree, oh, yeah, I just wish the snow would just go away, it would just all melt up, it's such a pain, I have to shovel my driveway and do this and do that, and even after it's all gone, it's still just wet and cloudy. It's a way of communicating that you understand what the other person is trying to get across, even if it's not made very, very directly apparent. It's a thought process and emotion. It's, this is the way I'm feeling. It's also a way to break any kind of awkwardness. If you're a clerk or someone who works in retail behind a desk, the customer may start this interaction as a way to break off the silence, because the silence may be felt as awkward to them. Now, it may not be awkward to you. It may not be awkward to various autistic individuals. For me, it's not really that awkward. I'm doing a job, I'm focused, but the customer may just be standing there and not know what to do with themselves. So they start up a conversation about something that is has not a lot of meaning to it, is non-offensive, is easy to discuss as far as everyone else is concerned, and won't cause any type of deep argument or deep discussion. You're not going to have someone come up there and say, I'm not sure I agree with all of the quantum mechanics that Stephen Hawking brings up. For example, this equation right here that I wrote down, I'm not sure if I agree with this, because nobody's going to do that. If somebody does that, it's very rare. When it comes to social interaction, neurotypicals usually will use things that are, like I said, not offensive, kind of shallow, easy to talk about, that is assumed everyone knows about or has some knowledge of, that is easy to grasp. And like I said, it was designed to make things easier as far as social interaction. But as we just talked about this characteristic, there is difficulties in understanding this among autistics. This doesn't mean that they're any less smarter, that they're any less intelligent, or that they're being cold or abrasive or mean. There is a serious just misunderstanding here that is not seen clearly. You wouldn't try to ask a blind person if they could see the same funny picture you could on your phone, would you? No, you wouldn't do that. But because the person is blind and you could recognize that they are blind, you don't do that. But when it comes to an autistic individual, if they don't get the joke or don't get the conversation, the interpretation is that they're being mean or cold, that they're not being nice, and they're doing that on purpose. And that's wrong. That actually dismisses any sort of disability. But for a lot of people, they don't know that person may be autistic. So again, that goes into disclosure, and that's another topic we'll be talking about in the very, very near future. So when it comes to autism, it's diagnosed based on observation by a diagnostician or a team of diagnosticians, such as neuropsychologists, psychologists, maybe a psychiatrist, or even a licensed clinical social worker, etc., etc. So a professional diagnosis usually a professional diagnosis must be sought by either the individual or their family, depending on the person's age. There are a lot of people who are they are self-diagnosed, or they are given an informal diagnosis, and those are, in many ways, they are no less relevant. When it comes to a self-diagnosis, there may be issues for this, reasons behind this, that they don't get an actual professional diagnosis. On self-diagnosis, I'm not against it, but I'm not for it, because I don't quite know enough about that, but I don't see an inherent major wrong with it, aside from if everyone starts self-diagnosing as part of a fad of, I have autism, or I have autism, and everybody just starts saying it even though they have no idea what that actually means. Now, on the other hand, when it comes to an informal diagnosis, this has grown recently, especially in regards to adults who are seeking a diagnosis. I had a family member who was seeking a diagnosis, and when they went into the doctor's office to get the diagnosis, they went through all the traits. The diagnostician checked all the boxes. Everything was put in order, and it was, yes, you do have autism. I can give you a diagnosis, but you're in your middle age. What good is it going to do you? You already have a job. You already have a home. You drive. You pay your own bills. You buy your own groceries. You live. You're able to sustain yourself. I mean, what's the point of a diagnosis? And I've heard this from a number of adults, especially recently, because it seems that diagnosis by many in the medical community is not seen as an actual part of the individual, as something that they can say, okay, I see what's going on here. I have this documented, that this is legitimate, that this is real, and I can use this to further learn about myself, my capabilities, my limitations, all about who I am. But rather, it's seen as merely a step to acquiring proper accommodations and accessibility in a variety of situations, such as needing help getting a job, needing help acquiring a home, needing help getting a personal care assistant, etc., etc. And the problem is, for a lot of adults who are getting diagnosed or are seeking one, being told, well, what good is it going to do you, has really done a number to them. Because it says, well, yeah, we'll give it to you, but it's not really going to help. And that kind of perspective is extremely harmful. It does not help to say, well, this isn't going to do any good. Because frankly, it's not true. Getting a diagnosis, even if you're not seeking out accommodations, even if you're not seeking out accessibility or a personal care attendant or anything else in your life, if you're just looking for an answer, a diagnosis is critical for that. Because now you have a piece of paper in front of you that says, I do have this, and this is real, and this is legit, and whenever I have issues in my life, it's not because something is wrong with me. It's because this is just part of who I am. This is how my brain functions. This is how I function. This is how I exist. And there is nothing wrong with that. The things that I do, I may want help in regards to perhaps various movements, perhaps being able to understand verbal language, being able to communicate socially with people, or even just improve how I learn or how I take care of myself. Perhaps I want those things for myself. Perhaps I want to improve the quality of my life based on my terms. But even if I don't, having a diagnosis says this is legitimate. So that way, when you talk with other people, or someone says, hey, you're weird, or something's wrong with you, or something, or don't do this, or why can't you just understand? Instead of just sitting there going, I don't know why I can't understand, or why am I so weird or different? What's wrong with me? The person that gets the diagnosis can look and say, this is what this is. Nothing is wrong with me, but this is how I function. This is how I work. This is how I learn. This is how I communicate. And even though it's not the same as what everybody else says, it's no less irrelevant. I may be different in some ways, but that doesn't mean that I need to conform or be forced to conform in certain ways, or I should be denied a diagnosis of who I truly am. And that's one of the major problems I have with the whole, what good is it going to do you? We have no problem giving a diagnosis to a child, because once we do that, we put in place all sorts of methods. We say, okay, here we go. We're going to go in, we're going to do ABA therapy. We're going to do this therapy, we're going to do that therapy. They're going to school, great. We'll do a 504, we'll do an IEP. We'll throw all the acronyms at this child, because we're trying to make sure we do as much early intervention as we can so the child can grow up and have a good quality of life. Or at least that's what we're told. Usually, it's not expressed in those words. Usually, it's expressed as, we do as much as we can to make sure the child is more normal. And there's one of the words that a lot of people like to talk about. One of the contrived platitudes that I get to hear a lot is, well, normal is just a setting on a washer, or no one's truly normal. Well, the term is not a great one to use, and it does have a lot of issues with it. However, when you say things like normal's just a setting on a washer, or normal's just a setting on this, or nobody's truly normal, okay, but that completely disregards how we view other people and what we consider to be the standard, what we consider to be the default. And that's the major problem here. That's the major problem with normal. So, but we'll talk about that more. I keep going off topic into other areas. But what I wanted to basically say is that a diagnosis is critical. If you don't get one, that doesn't mean the end of the world. It doesn't mean that you're not autistic. It doesn't mean that you don't have these issues. But it makes things more legitimate and enables you to seek out the things that you need to improve your own quality of life if you want to. Because you can say you're autistic, but if you don't have a piece of paper behind you, if you don't have an official expert diagnosis from someone, then it is seen as less legitimate. Even if they don't say that, even if someone who you're talking to say, as you say, I need this at work, I need these accommodations, you can say that, and they can say, oh yes, we understand. But if you don't present that piece of paper to them that says, I officially have been diagnosed, then you are not taken as seriously. And that's a problem that you will encounter as an autistic individual until you present something that shows that you'll be taken seriously. Of course, then at the same time, as an autistic adult, once you disclose that information, you'll be treated differently by a variety of people. And so that creates its own new set of problems that you didn't face before you disclosed, before you had to. But regardless of either direction there, having a diagnosis is critical to your own self-worth, because it doesn't tell you that you're broken. It doesn't tell you that you're wrong. It provides an answer, something you can research, something you can discuss, that you can explore. So that way you know more about who you are as a person and more about your own disability. So with that, let me see. I think we don't have a whole lot of time left here. We're actually approaching the top of the hour. So I will just preview a couple things that we'll be discussing. Of course, the next topic we'll try and be discussed will be talking about disclosure. If not the next show, it'll be on the show after that. Disclosure is a very important issue, and there are no clear black and white answers. It is all various monochromatic shades when it comes to disclosure. We will also discuss, of course, autism in popular culture, how autism is represented by various forms of media, and how limited the participation and the inclusion of autistics in those forms of media is in this day and age. Basically, that you don't have autistic producers or autistic directors, or autistic writers, or for that matter, autistic actors. Yes, they actually do exist. I know, you're probably shocked. Autistic actors, really? Yes, they do actually exist. Unfortunately, we don't hear much of them, not because they don't speak up or audition for parts, but because they are dismissed or ignored. Also, at some point, we will discuss parents. We will discuss neurotypical parents. We will discuss autistic parents. We will also discuss parents diagnosed later in life, possibly even later than their children. It will be a very sensitive topic. It will be a very volatile topic, but we will try to handle it as best we can when it comes to that discussion. Because parents, for good or bad, play a very, very, very important role in an autistic person's life, much like they do for others. Of course, we will also discuss various myths and stereotypes, especially regarding health and the causes of autism. More specifically, the treatments and therapies that are not licensed, not recommended, but seem to proliferate. And that, of course, goes hand in hand with talking about parents. In that same vein, we will also discuss the problems with being diagnosed at a young age. What doctors say to parents, what those parents feel, what resources they get, and what resources they don't get. One of the things that I've noticed over my limited lifetime is that many parents, when they get a diagnosis for their young child, they really don't have too many autistic adults in their life, if any at all, that they can talk to and say, okay, what can I expect? How should I work with my child? Because they have been given this diagnosis, and I've been told all the horrible things that can happen and what we have to do as far as school and work and home, etc. But no one's really informed me how my child might grow up. So there's not many autistic adults that parents can reach out to and say, what was your experience like? I know it's not the same as my child's, but I'm sure there are parallels here that they can relate to and I can relate to, and I can work through this. That kind of information is important, but we rarely, if ever, share it. And that's because there are, unfortunately, There are a lot of barriers between parents of autistic children and the autistic adults of today who are advocating for themselves. There's a lot of barriers, a lot of issues, a lot of problems, a lot of arguments, a lot of yelling, and that will not be easy to overcome, but it is extremely important that we do so, if not for the health of our children, if not for their quality of life as autistics, for the next generation of autistics who will be growing up. The fights and strides we make today will make their lives a little bit easier. Finding equity and equality where there used to be discrimination and bigotry is a major, major step forward. And it's something that we should focus on. So with that, we're going to wrap it up today. Again, my name is Leo Jones, and I'm your host. This has been Neurologic. Neurologic is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. To view a copy of this license, visit creativecommons.org/licenses/by-nc-nd/4.0 or send a letter to Creative Commons, P.O. Box 1866, Mountain View, California 94042, USA. Neurologic uses the song Furious Freak, created by Kevin MacLeod, for its intro and outro music. Visit him at incompetech.com. Furious Freak is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license, creativecommons.org/licenses/by/3.0. You can reach Leo Jones and Neurologic by email at neurologicpodcast@gmail.com.